Derek Kilmer, Chris Binns, Todd Bloom, and Elizabeth Presley.
All right, thank you for joining us. We're getting right on in.
This year's primary election is August 2nd. If you're not yet registered or you have moved, you may still register or change your address online at votewa.gov. That's votewa.gov by July 25th. You should receive your ballot, or if you are registered as a voter and your address is correct. Your ballot must be postmarked or placed in the ballot drop box by 8 p.m. August 2nd. This form is being recorded and will be posted on the League of Women Voters website, lwvtpc.org. That's lwvtpc.org. The questions tonight were submitted by voters and co-sponsoring organizations. Some may have been consolidated or reworded, and I can tell you right now that we're not going to get to all of them because they were a lot submitted. I apologize in advance. We only have so much time. We received so many questions, we are not going to even ask for live audience questions. Our timekeeper today is Terry Baker. She will hold up cards to let the candidates know when they have 60 seconds remaining, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and when it's time to stop. When you see the stop card, you may finish a short sentence. Candidates, please stay on gallery view so that you can see me and the timer. Please do not talk unless it's your turn. Please mute yourself when it's not your turn to speak. The audience is on mute and cannot use the chat function. A reminder that civility is expected. I ask each of you to confirm that you agree to our ground rules, which among other things say that you will address the issues and not make personal attacks. Please confirm by giving me the thumbs up. Thank you all. Appreciate that. Each candidate has up to 2 minutes for an opening statement. After that, the order of questions will rotate and each candidate will be asked the same question. At the end, each candidate can make a 1-minute closing statement. The order of the opening 2-minute statements is ballot order. We'll start with Rebecca Parson. Your 2-minute statement, please.
Hi, thank you so much to the League for hosting this forum and to the other candidates for being here, as well as everybody who submitted questions ahead of time. My name is Rebecca Parson, and I'm a Democrat running for this district, Washington 6th District, because I believe that in the richest country on earth, nobody should be homeless, hungry, in poverty, or without healthcare, and we shouldn't be facing worse and worse climate crises like wildfires and heat waves when we have so many tools available at our disposal to address the climate crisis as well as the money. I'm the only candidate in the race who stands for Medicare for All, a national jobs program, including the Green New Deal, and real inflation relief in the form of checks like we had with the COVID relief checks. I do not take any corporate money, any corporate PAC or lobbyist money, and I've raised the most in small dollar donations of any candidate in the race. I know we've got a lot of questions ahead of us, so I'll just leave it to that and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tom Triggs did not respond to our invitation, so there's no statement that he sent. Derek Kilmer was unable to be here tonight, but he did send a statement, and under our ground rules, me as the moderator will read the statement. I just want to make a disclaimer ahead of time that this is in no way an endorsement. The League of Women Voters never endorses candidates. We just offer candidates the opportunity to provide a statement which we read. So I'll go ahead and read that statement. Thank you for hosting this candidate forum. We're voting on appropriations bills in the House this week, and as a member of the committee, I'm sorry that my responsibilities mean I am not able to join you in person this evening. I do want to thank you for the work that you do. Because of you, there's more civic engagement and more informed voters across our community. I'm running for re-election to get the economy working better for people. Right now, people in our area are being squeezed by inflation. That's why I voted to crack down on price gouging by oil companies and lower gas prices. I helped write legislation to reduce dependence on China and boost manufacturing in America, which should reduce inflation. And I voted to make prescription drugs more affordable and expand Social Security to provide relief from rising prices. While the other party has been standing in the way of many of these things from becoming law, I'm committed to fighting to give folks a break. I'm running to stand up for reform. I'm pushing to reduce the role of big money in politics, to ban members of Congress from buying stocks, and to stop members from being paid if they don't do their jobs and pass a budget. Like the League, I'm committed to stopping voter suppression and protecting voting rights. I'm running to get government working again for people, to clean up Puget Sound, expand Social Security, lower the cost of housing and reduce homelessness, keep our neighborhoods safe for everyone by funding police, support local small businesses, and protect a woman's right to choose. In Congress, I'm proud to be recognized as one of the representatives most committed to bringing people together, even working with people with whom I disagree. But don't take my word for it. There's a reason I'm supported by a dozen mayors and groups like the League of Conservation Voters, the State Labor Council, Planned Parenthood, and the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. In endorsing me, the Seattle Times wrote, quote, straightforward, good faith governance deserves a bipartisan renaissance. Kilmer's work has brought Congress closer to that ideal, and he has earned another term in it to advance it. I'm committed to helping people in our area who are struggling. I ask for your vote. That's the end of the statement by Derek King. Next candidate with the 2-minute statement, Chris Binns, your statement, please.
I'm running for Congress because the leadership in the state and at the national level aren't protecting me. They're not protecting my neighbors, coworkers, or the children. They're abusing us. See, I'm in the protection business. I'm supposed to protect the women, the children, elderly, and the infirm. And the people who want to state and stand in the truth need some serious protection today. Try saying the shot won't keep you from getting COVID or passing it on, or you're not going to take it. You can get fired. Try being a kid in school or a teacher and tell a class that a boy can't become a girl. Could be trouble. How about behavior being more important than race, or masks don't work and you're not going to wear one? It goes on and on. I and the people of the six need to know there's someone in D.C. who values the truth, the importance of it. And there's someone who will stand with them at the school, board, city, county council meetings, even at court. Myself or my representative, if I can't make it. You see, there's a an agenda being peddled there, that there are these new truths about the nature of mankind and the foundational principles of this country. It's a lie, and we need to stand up now and reject it. American culture and heritage are hanging in the balance. We need to return to teaching and exhibiting the unambiguous truths to our children, as they are the future, not me. This is not a game. Only moral, disciplined, and discerning people are capable of self-governance. The founders and framers knew it, as does most Americans today. Vote Binns, vote for the truth.
Thank you. Todd Bloom, your statement. Unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting me. I appreciate this opportunity to address the voters of the 6th District. We've been seeing over the past several months rising inflation, increasing economic uncertainty, a down stock market. We've been in, quote, bear market territory for some time now. November highs in the stock market. Since then, we've erased several $1 trillion of wealth from America. Many of us think of the wealth of America as concentrated in the hands of the top 1%. But many of us, when we look at our 401k statements, see our wealth dissipating, slipping away, our retirements, our hard-earned assets evaporating before our eyes. Unlike many of the other candidates in the race, I've worked in business most of my adult life. I've been a CPA since the early 90s. I've been a licensed attorney. I speak with business people, with retirees, with everyday people, every day as clients. And I've also served in the military. 20 years to commission service, much of it after 9/11. I've deployed to the Persian Gulf, and I felt it viscerally in the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think that the incumbent is too aligned with this president who is clearly failing. We need additional checks on the presidency, and we need common sense legislation to right the ship, to correct our course. And with someone like me, you've got the experience, the credentials, and the wherewithal to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Kreiselmeyer initially said she would attend, but contacted us today saying that she was unable to attend. Well, while she did not provide a statement to be read, she indicated that if you would like, you could visit her website, which is www.cleanupthehouse.com. That's www.cleanupthehouse.com if you want to find out what her positions are. So thank you all the candidates for your opening statements. Now we come to the questions.
Wait a minute. Sorry, never mind. I just want to know if Rebecca, are you, you have two up? It's one of those, are they both you? No, I'm sorry about that. That must be a team member. I'll tell them to get off. Sorry about that.
So now we come to the questions. Each candidate gets up to 90 seconds to answer each question. For some questions, I may indicate you only have 60 seconds. The candidate order will rotate for each question, so that for question number 1, we'll start with Chris Binns. We'll go Chris Binns, Todd Bloom, then Rebecca Parson. The first question is, if elected, what legislation would you support to ensure every U.S. citizen over the age of 18 is able to vote? Chris Binns.
Well, as a federal representative, most of the voting, that under the Constitution, those criteria are reserved to the states. And I'm not sure, I think there's the Voting Rights Act that's been in existence, but my basic feeling is as long as they're following the Constitution, I mean, each individual state can set their criteria and their residency, and I don't really feel that there's too much of a federal purview involved in the registration, or that people should be able to vote. I think most of the local communities and states, they're going to make a just call on that. And so that's my response to that question.
Thank you. Todd Bloom, if elected, what legislation would you support to ensure every U.S. citizen over the age of 18 is able to vote?
I believe, similarly to Mr. Binns, that the 10th Amendment reserves the rights. The Constitution specifically states that the state legislature shall have the authority. In fact, I think that Washington State has been a leader. Clearly, we've seen our State Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, has been appointed by President Biden at the federal level. So I think as a state, we have done a yeoman's work, so to speak, in the area of voting. We have a good, effective method of vote counting and tabulation and monitoring. And I believe that as a federal elected official, I would need to look at the committee hearings and information that would tend to cast doubt on that and analyze the issue as events develop that would tend to suggest otherwise. But I do not feel at this point that there is a strong cause to interfere with the states. For example, I know Texas and North Carolina state voting laws have been challenged, but again, I believe that the states are permitted to do that by the Constitution, and that the courts may decide particular issues, but that at this point, I don't believe that there is a federal prerogative to intervene in what is the state legislative mandate under the Constitution.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson, if elected, what legislation would you support to ensure every U.S. citizen over 18 can vote?
I would support restoring all of the provisions of the Voting Rights Act, which has been gutted over the years since it was passed in the 60s. I would also support measures like ranked choice voting so that voters can rank candidates in their order of preference, which allows people to vote for their top choices and not worry about it being a spoiler or taking anything else into concern except just which candidate supports the policies that the voter wants. I also support automatic voter registration nationwide. Nationwide mail-in ballots so that everybody in the country can have the same convenient voting that we are lucky to have here in Washington State. And I support measures like public financing of elections with democracy vouchers so that every citizen in the country can make a political donation to candidates of their choice with no out-of-pocket expense. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Todd Bloom. What legislation do you support to address inflation? Todd Bloom.
I was just reviewing a Wall Street Journal editorial written by former Congressman from Tennessee, Harold Ford Jr., on the 23rd of June. I commend it to your viewers and to the League of Women Voters and to the participants this evening. It outlines a number of steps, I think, that, or should I say missteps, that the Biden administration has undertaken in regulatory matters with regards to fossil fuels and traditional energy. We were energy independent prior to the current administration taking office in 2021. And we have ample natural resources that can be much more efficiently and more effectively removed and utilized in a responsible and careful way than what we are seeing in other parts of the world. Here we've got the administration going to some of our former enemies and to authoritarian regimes seeking additional fossil fuel resources because it's become evidently quite clear that our climate friendly or our renewable resources are inadequate at this point. I'm an all of the above type of person, and I'd like to see development in all these areas, but we can't cut off known resources in advance of having adequate resources ready at that point.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson, what legislation do you support to address inflation?
I support legislation to not just crack down on or investigate price gouging, but to ban it. I support inflation relief checks like we had with COVID. We had several checks. I think that people need help filling their gas tanks. Prices are still very high, even if they're coming down a little bit, especially in Washington State and the whole West Coast. I also support price and rent caps like we had under Nixon and FDR. I support a national job program so that more people can work at full-time jobs at a living wage. Many people are fully employed right now, but it's through a combination of gig jobs and low-paying work. So instead, I support a job program like we had during the Great Depression to bring good-paying union jobs to the entire country. I also support subsidies for U.S. manufacturing. We need to deal with the supply issue by bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. And I also support a $30 minimum wage, which is based on data from the MIT Living Wage Calculator. It's the minimum living wage in the entire country. And I've been on Fox News and Newsmax to defend it. So if anybody's interested, you can check out those interviews. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Spence, your legislation that you would support to address inflation?
Well, it might take more than one piece of legislation. The inflation, as I understand it, to get it under control is a multi-pronged approach. One, there's several causes of inflation. One is just the pure printing of money that you don't have. And so legislation that would be as near to a balanced budget as possible. You've got to drive down the spending, and that would be with proper priority legislation that would get the budget under control. But as Mr. Bloom said, one of the primary driving forces of inflation is energy costs, specifically fossil fuels, fertilizer, the gas, the diesel, these types, and the energy costs. These are the types of things that fuel inflation, And it's going to be a long, hard slog. You know, once this thing starts, it's not going to end overnight. And we need to have those policies put into place. If we opened up our fields and stuff and sent the message that we were going to get back in the energy producing, gas producing, fossil fuel producing to the world, it would the price of the barrel would start to drop if we meant it. So we've got to anything that would open up and make energy cheaper and more self-sufficient would be the legislation I'd be supporting.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Rebecca Parson. We had a lot of questions about healthcare. What legislation would you support regarding access to healthcare? Specifically, voters submitted questions wanting to know if you support universal access to healthcare, or if you support single-payer healthcare, and why or why not. Rebecca Parson, please.
Yeah, I am proud to be the only candidate in the race who supports Medicare for all. So that means single-payer, universal healthcare, where no matter how much of an income you make, however low or however high, you can see a doctor without having to worry about medical bankruptcy or copays, and without having an insurance company get between you and your doctor, between you and the medical procedures that you need. Something that's not many people know because it's not spoken about very much in the media is the fact that on average, a poor person in this country dies 10 years younger than a rich person. Additionally, 1/3 of COVID deaths, over 300,000 in the US, were people who did not have health care. So while Obamacare was a good first step, we can't stop there. We need to keep improving our healthcare system with Medicare for all. I also support a state initiative. It's called Whole Washington, and it's to bring the equivalent of that at the state level so that we are pursuing it on two tracks, federal and state, to get everybody the health care they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Binns, your legislation that you would support for access to health care, specifically why or why not you might support universal health care or single payer.
Right. My orientation is that I pretty much keep the government out of your own personal decision, especially, and there's nothing more personal than healthcare. I mean, there should be a safety net that people can be able to, of course, get some healthcare that they need. But I support legislation and put the patient first and give people as much choice as they can. I believe that government involvement has driven up the cost of healthcare, and actually the quality has gone down because of it. So anything that would reduce the cost of healthcare and improve the amount of doctors that want to be in private practice, tort reform and malpractice reduction in insurance, anything that can get the patient more involved and have more power rather than, medical bureaucrats making the decision and forcing the doctors what kind of care they can and cannot get. I'm kind of a freedom and liberty guy when it comes to health care, and think that's always the best solution than really government involvement of hardly any kind.
Thank you. Todd Bloom, what legislation would you support regarding access to health care?
I may be unique among the candidates in this forum who is a member of the VA healthcare network system. And I'm here to report, if you haven't been here, those complaints you've heard, they're legitimate. It's a problem when you've got one source. And one of the stories we've seen recently is the Biden administration allowing doctors to be pulled away from veteran care to address health care issues at the border because of the immigration crisis that we're facing right now. And how fair is that to veterans such as myself, or who are in a much worse condition than I am, or much more reliant, or don't have the same resources to be able to avail themselves of other situations? And I'm here to personally testify. If you haven't been in a single payer system, you're not going to like it. We've got a decent system here with the Apple Health in Washington, the network system. I think we need to make sure that as Mr. Binns referenced, that our network, that our safety net helps those who really need help and those who are the most in need. But I tend to favor employer-based systems And we need to also do away with these Cadillac plans and separate special healthcare systems for legislators who don't have to be subjected to the same thing as everybody else.
Thank you. The next question we'll start with Chris Binns. The annual budget is due each year at the end of September, but for most of the past 20 years, Congress has failed to pass a budget on time, often extending stopgap measures multiple times before passing a budget. If elected, what would you do to ensure the budget is passed on time? Chris Binns.
Well, I'd be a freshman congressman. I don't know how much weight I could throw around, but it is a disgrace. I'd be just challenging fellow Republicans and Democrats that, we swore an oath, to uphold the Constitution and to do our constitutional duties, which is to pass a budget on time. And with the concerns of inflation and the national debt and the interest growing on it, I cannot believe that you can't make enough sense that everybody needs to knuckle down, prioritize, and do the essential things that the federal government's supposed to do, and pass a budget and be able to explain it to the people so that they understand why you made the decisions you made, and to be able to stand firm in them so that they can understand we've got to get control of spending. It's one of the only things, or it's a big thing that's going to help control this inflation that is the worst tax, a regressive tax. It affects the poor and lower income more than anyone else. And it's just essentially get spending under control. We're not helping the American people.
Thank you. Todd Bloom, what would you do to ensure the budget is passed on time?
Well, as Mr. Binns indicated, unless I'm going to be made the Speaker of the House on day one, which is somewhat wishful thinking, perhaps, there are limitations as to what can be done. Clearly, it would be a priority of mine. Again, I don't think any of my the fellow candidates have completed the Defense Enhanced Financial Management training course, which I did back in I think it was 2009 or 2008 or 2009. This has in-depth training on the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, the PPBE process. And Department of Defense is clearly by far the largest single agency which undergoes this process. Most of them, the budget experts come to the agency, or the agency goes to the budget folks, the DoD, the agency, the folks come to the agency. So I've worked in programming and policy and budget execution. But I think clearly one of the things we need to look at is zero-based programming. I think that, I saw today former Secretary Betsy DeVos had called to disestablish the Department of Education. Now, I don't know if I go that far at this point, but clearly there are some priorities in Congress, and we really need to put our budget where the priorities are. And I think that we've just got so many priorities that we're not prioritizing everything.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, the budget is really a representation in a way of Congress as a whole. The process behind it is gridlocked. There's a lot of stops and starts. Things happen late, yet somehow still always at the last minute. And an example of that is that the recent budget bill was over 2,700 pages long, but members of Congress voted on it with less than 24 hours to read it. So even if you're a speed reader, you're not going to be able to read 2,700 pages in less than 24 hours, which means that members of Congress are voting on legislation they hadn't even had time to read. And even if they had their staffers read it, I doubt that somebody from either the member of Congress or their staff was able to read every line of that budget. And I would not be comfortable voting for something like that. So that's why I would, as a member of Congress, you get more access to the media than a member of the public. That's not necessarily the way it should be, but I would go to the media and do interviews and talk about why were we given less than 24 hours to look at this legislation? What is hiding in there? For example, the latest budget bill has provisions protecting dark money through C-14 through nonprofits. So that's something that I firmly believe I would need to read legislation before voting on it one way or another. We have, well, anyway, 15 seconds there, so I'll end it with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Todd Bloom. If elected, will you support legislation to ensure that American women and girls have access to abortion and contraception? Todd Bloom.
Well, I don't think it's any surprise to those of you who remember me from running in 2016 that I'm pro-life. The Supreme Court ruling in Dobbs sets the U.S. back to the pre-Roe v. Wade status, which was that the states decided the issue. I don't really, am not overly concerned that the state of Washington is going to inordinately restrict abortions to the extent that women and girls in the state of Washington, in the district, are going to find themselves unable to avail themselves of those services, should that be their decision. I think that this is a very, it's hard to understate how important and the kind of lifetime effects that this type of decision can have on people. And I think that it's a continuing debate that needs to be, that needs to continue about the sanctity of life and when does life begin and when does that decision make sense in certain circumstances. I mean, I'm not here to judge people on their own personal decisions, but I don't view this as a federal legislative prerogative. So the short answer, of course, is I don't believe there's a necessity for federal legislation. And the longer answer, of course, is that this is a very difficult decision and that it's a very personal decision and that it's not the prerogative of the federal government or federal legislation, in my view.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, I am pro-choice, the only pro-choice woman in this race. I would also be the first woman to ever represent this district in Congress. So in Congress, naturally, I would support the Women's Health Act, which the House passed and is currently stalled in the Senate. I also support the Equal Rights Amendment. I believe that Congress needs to finalize that. And I believe that as a woman, my rights are not up for debate, discussion. It simply is, the freedom to reproductive health care is a right, and I would never waver on that. I also find it concerning that in their decision, one of the justices, Clarence Thomas, put in his opinion that in the wake of having reversed Roe v. Wade, they needed to also take a look at gay marriage and laws criminalizing gay sex. Now, as a gay person, the first gay person who would ever be sent to Congress from the state of Washington, I find it very concerning that now the Supreme Court is apparently going to be looking at taking away my right to marriage. So, as a gay woman, I do not believe that reproductive freedom is up for debate, that equal rights in terms of marriage is up for debate. These are things that I would always vote and fight to support.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
A question, please.
Yes. If elected, will you support legislation to ensure American women and girls have access to abortion and contraception?
No. All in all, I would say no. I tend to agree with most of the statements of Mr. Bloom. The Supreme Court has set this matter of life and contraception, or abortion, or ending it, pretty much back to the states, which I think is good and proper. This is a illustrative or an example of the type of legislation I would be loath to support, simply because in the last several years, or if not longer, Congress they pass laws that are just, it could be unconstitutional. You want to stay well within the Constitution. The idea of a federal law, one way or the other, as it pertains to abortion or contraception, is just, I would avoid that. It just jerks people around. So for 50 years, it was legal, and then all of a sudden it's not legal anymore because it's gone back to the states where it belongs. It's not fair to do to people. So I'm with Mr. Bloom. It's a state's issue, and I think time to sort this out it will be needed. And I think people's opinions and perspectives will begin to change on this. So the answer is no.
Thank you. Next question is 60 seconds. Do you support, and we'll start with Rebecca Parson, do you support redirecting taxes designated for public schools to pay students who attend private schools? In other words, vouchers. Rebecca Parson.
No, I do not support that. I believe that our public money should be spent on public goods, including public education. And I completely, unequivocally oppose the conservative right-wing attempts to privatize our school system, to weaken public schools. I believe that every child in this country deserves an equal education. And if we're sending and funneling money away from public schools to private schools, it weakens the public school system. And it means that some kids are going to get a lower quality education than others. And that's something that I absolutely do not support.
Thank you. Chris Spins, do you support redirecting taxes designated for public schools to pay students to attend private schools?
Well, that would be federal money, I guess you're talking about. I would say overall, yes, I would favor that. The public schools, for the most part, seem to be a disaster, and then a lot of indoctrinating going on there, and you know, the grades aren't very well, and I don't think we're teaching them very good. I'm a big local control. The local parents in the community have a much bigger stake and understanding of what their community needs and how they want their kids raised. And if they're not finding it in the public school, it's not the public school that I went to. So no, I would support redirecting it. Parents are getting desperate to have their children get a decent education, and public schools and providing it. Absolutely.
Thank you. Todd Bloom. Todd Bloom, please.
Yes, I believe that the school vouchers have benefits, certainly, and that the ability for parents to pick and choose what school they want to send their kids to is important. Parents may not agree with what is being taught in the schools, how it's being taught, how their education dollars are being spent. And this should put pressure on public schools to up their game, to improve what they're providing to the community, to the public, and to the students, to set those students up for success. We have seen epic failures over the pandemic, and since then we have been able to see research that shows the education outcomes are just abysmal. We have got to do something about this, and holding our teachers and our schools and our education system accountable, I believe, is incredibly important. And we need to focus on the education of our students and their success.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Chris Spins and we'll go back to 90 seconds. LGBTQ plus rights and freedoms were codified by a 2015 Supreme Court ruling. With the recent threat to overturn another Supreme Court precedent, what legislation do you support or would sponsor to ensure the rights of LGBTQ plus people? Chris Spins.
Well, I think that, you know, we basically have the same rights as any of us. As long as you're not hurting anybody, nobody should be able to hurt you. I'm not a big fan of that type of behavior necessarily. I don't think it should be promoted. I think it should be, you know, what people do in the privacy of their own, that's their business, but I don't think it should be, I wouldn't pass any legislation. Those relationships aren't the same as a heterosexual relationship, and I can't think of any law I would that would enhance or celebrate or protect that kind of behavior.
Thank you. Todd Bloom, what legislation would you support or sponsor to ensure the rights of LGBTQ plus people?
Well, I believe that the Civil Rights Acts that we have on the books already do a great service, and quite frankly, the rights in the Constitution apply unequivocally. We've seen Supreme Court case in Obergefell. We've seen other previous Supreme Court cases. There's a fair amount of media attention to situations that are called into question. And one of my concerns, frankly, with regards to this is women's sports and Title IX, and legislation that was passed that is devoted to developing women's sports and educational opportunities. And it's I think that one of my focuses would be on maintaining and creating a fairness in competition, particularly in sports. Other than that, I do believe that, when we look back at the progress that we have made over the decades since the 60s, and referring specifically to civil rights legislation that was originally intended for African Americans, that has been expanded and rightfully should be expanded. Everybody, that our Constitution, the preamble, all men are created equal. And I truly believe that, and I believe that our system believes that, and that we as an American people are fair enough to understand that and execute and carry out our lives like that on a daily basis.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, like I mentioned, if I were elected, I would be the first member of the LGBTQ plus community in Congress from Washington State. And so I support our rights as a community. I remember what it was like before gay marriage, and I have found it extremely disturbing to hear all of the rhetoric from the right wing, calling all gay people groomers, calling trans people groomers. It's hateful bigotry. And though I am not trans, I am deeply, deeply concerned for the rights of trans people and how they are being vilified in the media right now. So I support legislation to protect the LGBTQ plus community, including things like the Equality Act to protect against discrimination around housing, healthcare, basic services. I also support the Every Child Deserves a Family Act so that federally funded child welfare agencies can't discriminate against gay couples or same-sex couples who want to adopt. I support banning so-called conversion therapy, which is scientifically invalid and just a completely immoral practice, in my opinion. I also support banning the gay panic murder excuse because homophobia and transphobia are not excuses to kill people, and we need that reflected in federal law. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Todd Bloom. 14% of the population in Congressional District 6 are veterans. What legislation is your priority to address the needs of veterans? Todd Bloom.
Well, interestingly, I looked at the statistics, and I disagree with that number. Frankly, I think the number is 11.1%. It says that there, according to the Census Bureau, it says there are 79,598 total veterans in the district, and by my math, that's about 11%. Now, clearly, we do have a higher percentage of veterans in this district than the average. I think that America has a 7.1% veteran population. And as I mentioned earlier, I believe I'm the only candidate who is a member of the VA healthcare system. I think that there can be a lot of improvements that could be made to the VA healthcare system with regards to the provision of services to veterans, the identifying of the proper veteran population, and the flexibility of having services available to veterans. I think that there was a move afoot recently to reduce funding, I believe, in the VA healthcare administration for outside non-VA doctors to pay for private physicians. And this has been a recurring issue that we've seen over the years. It was a Mission Act. If you couldn't see a doctor within the VA doctor within 30 days, then you were authorized to go outside. And then they changed it somewhat. There's been a number of refinements, but that system clearly is in need of help.
Thank you.
I think that
Thank you. Rebecca Parson, what legislation is your priority to address the needs of veterans?
Well, one really sad statistic that I think about a lot is the fact that out of the over 600,000 homeless people in the U.S., 40,000 of those homeless people are veterans. So after serving overseas, risking their lives, they come back and our country can't even care enough about them to make sure that they have a home. I come from a family where people have served. My grandfather was career military in the Army. He fought in 3 different wars. And he taught me about the values that our country upholds, why he decided to join, while also being critical of the decisions that our country makes. Something that we could do to help veterans is to stop creating veterans by stop our endless wars overseas, destabilizing other countries, and then bringing people back home whose lives are forever changed by that experience. I think that we should also provide the housing as part of universal programs, provide veterans with the housing, healthcare, job training, and education they need. And ultimately, just I come back to that 40,000 statistic. We should not have 40,000 veterans sleeping on the streets in the richest country on earth, especially not after they have risked so much to serve the country.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
Well, I think I would tread very carefully. I'm not an expert on veterans hospitals or the veterans affairs and the problems that they've run into. Just as a concerned citizen and served in the Marine Corps myself, you got an example of kind of national health care there, where the government's involved in all the care that the veterans give, and it doesn't seem to work very well. So I would, I'd be cautious about that. I would refer to the people who have been in the trenches of the VA hospitals and seek their advice. They would be more readily available to identify the exact problems and to come up with solutions. I always thought that when that money dedicated, that if they didn't get fair or fast enough care, that they were able to go outside the system. I thought that was a good law. I may not have turned out as good as I thought, but they should be able to get the care they want without delay. And if they need more people or more doctors, I'm not sure. I have to defer to the experts before I could offer really any valuable legislation at all.
Thank you. Next question. We'll start with Rebecca Parson. What legislation would you support or propose to address climate change? Rebecca Parson.
To address climate change, I support the Green New Deal, and I'm the only candidate in the race who does. As part of the Green New Deal, I support a national job program because as part of transitioning quickly to 100% renewable energy, we're going to need a lot of work to be done. A lot of laying down of pipe, of wire, of all of the infrastructure that would be needed for that. And what that would do is bring good jobs to the 6th District. Now, we have on the Olympic Peninsula during the Great Depression, the jobs programs that were part of that under FDR, there were over 6 Civilian Conservation Corps camps that were brought to the Olympic Peninsula that helped build lodges, clear trails in the National Forest, National Park. And so there's precedent for that in this district and people whose lives were made better. And so I see the Green New Deal as a win-win for workers and climate because it would bring good union jobs across the country and especially here in the district while transitioning us rapidly to 100% renewable energy.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
Oh, I've been watching this stuff for a long time. I started off with the coming ice age. That's what the experts were saying then. And I've noticed the language changing from global warming to climate change and now to climate crisis. And you know, I guess all the experts will tell me the debate's over. And I never heard the debate. And I don't know anyone one that did. So I'm kind of a little skeptical. I've had my belly full of some of these experts lately on the economy, with things being transitory and the COVID vaccines, lockdowns, mask wearing. So I'm leery of experts. I think basically that I don't think it's a crisis. I'm not convinced it's man-made. I would not. I don't think we need to be in a hurry to do any of these things, especially now with the inflation and the need to drive energy prices down. I think a sane approach would be, we don't go running headlong into any of these unsustainable, unreliable green energy technologies when we don't have a substantial amount of reliable energy for businesses and for the people, and cheap themselves first. So I think we just be good stewards of the economy, keep a lookout, and move to more cleaner things as economically feasible. I'm not really a big afraid of the climate and don't think that man's necessarily causing it.
Thank you. Todd Bloom.
Yes, so I do believe that there is an anthropogenic climate impact. Now, you know, my problem. I mean, I've read Steve Kunin's. I've read a number of things, and I do believe that there's some evidence that mankind and humankind has had an impact on the climate. However, the climate czar John Kerry stated on being appointed that the United States could go to zero carbon emissions today, and it would have no effect on the climate because of other global emitters, India and China being most noteworthy, who are given more or less a free pass under the Paris Climate Accord. So I think that the United States trying to address this by themselves in a vacuum, as it were, when we have our European allies who are becoming increasingly reliant on dirtier fuels. They're being cut off from Russian gas, and they're substituting coal, and that the current environment militates against radical climate agenda and the Green New Deal. We've seen what this experiment with modern monetary theory is essentially what's going on now with these helicopter money that was passed out during the pandemic. And this is part of the reason why we've got raging inflation right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is 60 seconds. We'll start with Chris Benz. 19% of the population in the Congressional District 6 are children, and they can't vote. But you're running to represent them and their interests. What legislation do you support or propose to promote the well-being of children? Chris Benz.
Well, most important thing is that they get a good education, a sound education, and more of a classical education, where they're told really kind of what the truth is and what to think, so that they have a basis and that they can learn how to think better independently for themselves. I don't know of really any legislation other possibly than the voucher legislation. Parents are the best at taking care of children. I don't see government being involved too much in the legislation and what we can do for children, but they need to be taught the truth, and they need to be exposed to the truth, and they need to have the rights to say the truth without being punished, protected, for sure.
What legislation do you propose or support to promote the well-being of children?
Sorry, you were muted when you called on the person.
Todd Bloom, please.
Yes. So I think that one of the most important things that we can do for children is to leave them an economy that is functioning and that is growing. And right now, the types of policies that are being pursued without legislative support, in my opinion, are harming our economy and harming our economic outlook. What's happening right now between the war in Europe and food prices, the reduction of food production because of the restriction of nitrate and ammonia and fertilizers around the globe, is we're facing global food crisis, and we're facing an economic crisis. And the first thing that we absolutely need to do is get the economy turned around, get enough energy to maintain our current standard of living.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, I was a CASA in Pierce County for about a year. It's a court-appointed special advocate for children in foster care. And it's basically like a voluntary, unpaid social worker who advocates for the child's well-being and the child's interest in a system where kids can often fall through the cracks. And so this issue is really important to me. And I appreciate the question as well, because I hear from young people, especially middle school and high schoolers, who feel like they are not listened to and heard at all, and they feel powerless because, of course, they can't vote. And so I enjoy hearing from people under 18 and their ideas about what we should do in government and what we should change. So number one, I support Medicare for all, so every child can get health care, not die of preventable disease. More funding for public education, protecting the climate so that they have a healthy planet to live on, and free public college and trade school, so that if they want to go to trade school, community college, public college, they can do that and build the future that they want without worrying about debt.
Thank you. Next question, also 60 seconds, just 1 minute. And we'll start with Todd Bloom. So far this year, it's estimated that over 24,000 Americans have died from gun violence. The majority, 54%, by suicide. What legislation would you support or propose to address gun violence in the U.S.? Todd Bloom.
Well, I think that the first thing we need to do is we need to observe what our Constitution says about the right to bear arms not being infringed. Now, I don't believe that that's the end of the discussion, and I'm not ready to yield back the rest of my time on this. Clearly, suicide highlights the immense problem that we're seeing now in veteran suicide. And mental health and the stigma of mental health is really, I believe, one of the driving forces in that, whether it's PTSD or other types of untreated mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, or other types of treatable mental disease. I think that addressing our crisis in mental health is one of the most important things that we can do to driving those numbers down. I think that this would also go toward alleviating the homeless crisis that we're seeing.
Thank you.
And a lot of the crime that we're seeing as well.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, I have been, as a lot of people and probably many people watching, I'm sure just horrified by the recent mass shootings, especially Uvalde. It's just heartbreaking. And it shows that we need gun reform. I believe that we should increase the purchase age, the minimum purchase age for all firearms to 21 years old, require free safety training and continuing education for all licensed firearm owners, enact nationwide waiting periods for purchase of all firearms, as well as mandatory and universal background checks. And as well, an important part of the question was that over half of gun deaths are by suicide. And so to address that, I support increasing funding for mental health services as part of Medicare for all, so that people can get the mental health treatment that they need, that they want, so that they can be mentally healthy, which that would go a long way towards reducing gun deaths.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
I think that, of course, the 54% of people committing suicide by guns, there's a mental health issue there that needs to, be addressed. I guess I think most of the men do it. That I guess they think it's the fastest way. As for the other societal problems that may not be mental health. There's lack of self-control in these young men. I mean, these people, a lot of it has to do with gangs and that kind of situation. I would say you've got to enforce the laws, and and this isn't their first go around. Some of these guys need to be picked up off the streets and have the laws enforced and have them punished. And I think an increase in law enforcement and imprisonment would cut down on, especially on some of the gang violence, and get more police able to do their job.
Thank you. Next question, also 60 seconds. And we'll start with Rebecca Parson. In 1959, a one-word change in the IRS interpretation of the 501c4 rule allowed anonymous campaign donations, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars in dark money donations to both parties. For the past 12 years, Congress has written into law restrictions preventing the IRS from investigating 501c4 organizations. If elected, would you support legislation to end this source of dark money for campaigns or any other campaign finance reform? Rebecca Parson.
Yes, and that provision regarding the dark money is one of the provisions that was slipped into the budget bill that recently passed, and which members of Congress voted on without having even read. And you can, if anybody watching wants to learn more, you can go to readsludge.com to find out more about it. But getting money out of politics is one of the absolutely most important things that we can do to fix our broken and gridlocked Congress, because it impacts every other issue. And reversing that one-word change in that law regarding the IRS would be a lot easier than overturning Citizens United or amending the Constitution. I do believe we need to overturn Citizens United, but in the shorter term, changing this IRS regulation is a smaller, short-term thing that we could do. And I definitely encourage people to read more about it.
Thank you. Chris Binns, if elected, would you support legislation to end this source of dark money for campaigns or any other campaign finance reform?
I would think so. I'd like to answer cautiously. I'm not really familiar with that provision. But if it sounds like there's hidden donations of large amounts that people aren't identified by, I don't particularly like the sounds of that. I'd have to study the issue more, but I'm probably my view is people should be able to give as much as they want to give to any campaign, but past a certain point should probably be identified. The idea that there's all kinds of money going in and you don't know who's doing it, that does bother me, if that's in fact what you're talking about.
Thank you. Todd Bloom.
Yes, and this is a continuation of the previous question, because I wasn't allowed to respond to that previous question, but nevertheless, they're somewhat related, I guess. So, no, I mean, it does concern me, the amount of dark money. The other thing that we sometimes see are in-kind contributions of services or social media or whatever other types of contributions as well. And the problem with a lot of this is, I think, from my perspective, certainly, is how to quantify it or how to identify what the impact of it is. I know Trump's election in 2016 was largely credited to Twitter and the media circus around any tweet that he would put out. So clearly there are a lot of other factors besides money. I mean, we saw David McCormick in Pennsylvania outspent, I believe, Dr. Oz, and yet still did not win that race. But clearly a lot of money can make up the race very one-sided and be a negative and have a negative impact. I think that we do need to be concerned with.
Thank you. Next question, and again, 62 seconds because we're running short of time. What legislation would you support or propose to address immigration issues? We'll start with Chris Binns. You're on mute.
I'm unmuted now, right? Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I think people that come across the border illegally should be, taken back to their country of origin or back back right to Mexico. I don't know exactly the laws, but they're not being applied right. But there's a disaster on the border, and whatever policies we had prior to this administration seem to be making a lot more sense. I would err towards something like that. I think that we should be able to deport people almost immediately, given due process, and with very few asylum seeking people, because they're supposed to just get into the next country, not move through Mexico and seek asylum here. So anything that would tighten up the borders, restrict illegal immigration, I'm all for. It's a disaster down there, and the states are really suffering for it, and the whole country, really. Something's got to be done now and immediately.
Thank you. Todd Bloom.
Well, I think one of the problems here is not necessarily that Congress isn't legislating enough on this subject, but it's the enforcement of the existing laws that are on the books. Congress has made decisions about the law, and we've got a president and his Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas, who are refusing to enforce the laws that are on the books. Now, I mean, I'm sympathetic to people who are seeking asylum legitimately. But can you honestly tell me that there are 60,000 Afghans that all warrant asylum? Now, I know we had a large number, and we have a large number of troops there in country. But I think that clearly with the number of undocumented persons, aliens that reside in the country, that there is probably some congressional fix that needs to be applied. And certainly I think that I would be behind something that would allow us to resolve our problems with regards to immigration.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
This issue is extremely important. It's something that's local to Tacoma as well. In particular, we have one of the country's largest private immigration prisons right here in Tacoma. I've been to many protests outside it, helped raise thousands of dollars for the commissary accounts for people who are detained there. I support repealing the federal laws that are the grounds under which children are separated from their parents. We need to stop dividing and separating families, stop having children alone in cages, abolish ICE, which has proven time and again that it cannot be trusted to act humanely. And the agency didn't even exist until after 9/11. Our immigration system got along fine before that without ICE. We need to end Operation Streamline, which is the litigation system that allows mass hearings of multiple courtrooms of migrants, convicts a blanket conviction of many people all at once. And we need to stop the use of the military for immigration control, especially on U.S. territory.
Thank you. Next question, also 60 seconds. We'll start with Todd Bloom. How do you plan to promote the economic growth in rural areas with while maintaining the ecological nature of the 6th district? Todd Bloom.
Well, I think that there's a lot that we can do for economic development within the 6th district, maintaining ecological and climate stasis, as it were, or improvement, frankly. I think we do need to be very protective of our natural preserves, our natural beauty in this area. I avail myself quite frequently of the ability to get out into nature, to go camping or hiking or off-roading, and want to see those things protected. You know, I like to breathe clean air, and I like to drink clean water myself. One of the things that I've seen that has really caught my attention is and addresses the food insecurity issue is specialty farming, whether it's in urban areas or vertical farming in more concentrated areas. This alleviates the transportation issue, which of course is also affected by the shortages of fuel and the high cost of fuel, and it utilizes urban land and urban areas which are not being currently developed. So I think there are a lot of things we could explore to improve economic development in the district.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Well, the number one thing that we can do to support economic development in the 6th district is to bring more good jobs to people who need them, especially on the Olympic Peninsula, with the number of jobs in timber having just plummeted in the past few decades. No jobs really came along to replace them, certainly not enough. Many of those were tourism jobs that did come along that do not pay as well. And so we need a national jobs program like we have precedent for this, as I mentioned earlier. We had over 6 civilian conservation corps camps on the Olympic Peninsula that brought jobs, and that people on all sides of the political spectrum, remember that program with fondness because it helped people economically. And so something that we can do there is bring jobs to the district that pay well, a minimum of $30 per hour. Redirect subsidies away from the 1% into the 99%, for example, by subsidizing small business owners to pay their employees $30 per hour so that no small business is put out of business, and actually it increases economic development. So those are some of the programs I support for that.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
Yes, I think to promote, well, from the federal level, I'm kind of a local control guy, but from the federal level to promote economic development, we definitely need to, clean up the forests and get rid of the underbrush and get back to, I think, a more aggressive forest management. And I think we could start logging more and replanting. We've got plenty of room. The district is just wonderful. There's a lot of room, and of course, I like the clean water and air and everything too. And I think if there's restrictions that would keep us from federal restrictions from restarting or building nuclear power plants for energy and electricity, I think would be an excellent thing to do, and would create there'd be a lot of jobs involved in that. So mostly get the federal government out of the way, economic development, and protect businesses to be able to stay open should governors declare emergencies unnecessarily.
Thank you. Next question, also 60 seconds. We'll start with Rebecca Parson. If elected, how would you address the road closures in Olympic National Park and the Olympic National Forest that prevent access for the people of the district? Rebecca Parson.
I think we need to have more federal investment into maintaining the trails. And we have the issue, friends who live on the Olympic Peninsula talk to me about this, how they used to be able to go and hunt and fish on land that is owned by Weyerhaeuser, for example, but not being used currently. It's not currently being logged. And then the company put up fences so people can't go onto that property anymore. And this was, hunting and fishing to feed their families, food that they ate. And so I think we really need to work with these companies to allow people who live in the area to use that land, to support and sustain themselves off the land, and also make sure that roads are available so that we can enjoy it. Because the Olympic Peninsula is one of my favorite places on Earth. Anybody watching this, I encourage you to look up the quietest square inch in America. It was measured, and it's actually on the Olympic Peninsula in our district. So I love it, and I want to protect it.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
I think working with some of these companies, if they're restricting the roads where you can't get to where you'd like to get, it gets dicey if they own the land outright, and at least, and that's the way that they're doing that. I don't know federally necessarily what can be done about that, but I think we do need more roads and more access into some of these areas, just simply to be able to fight forest fires and to get equipment up there, and to encourage and facilitate more hunting and recreation, especially in the national forest areas and whatever abutting that's appropriate. And that's what I do.
Thank you. Todd Bloom.
Yes, I think it's important for folks to be able to avail themselves of national parks and national monuments, state parks, state forests, things of that nature. I certainly have availed myself of the state forests and national and state parks in the region. And I think that we need to make sure that we have dedicated funding for the national parks, national monuments, and funding. Grant funding for states, are particularly noteworthy or quality projects that are eligible for federal funding. I do commend folks to take advantage of the many wonderful areas that we have both on the Olympic Peninsula and in other parts of the state as well, to be able to experience this. But I think that to the extent federal funding is involved, I think it should be for federal projects and for national forests and national monuments and national parks.
Thank you. Now we're at the last question, and we'll start with Chris Binns, also 60 seconds. The trend in politics over the past several years has been to vilify people of different political beliefs. If elected, what will you do to ensure civility in discourse and factually accurate legislation and policies? Chris Binns.
Well, I'm kind of big on, I think civility is very important and very helpful. I think, to hold people accountable for the words they use, I think is important. I've noticed, that there's a callousness that's misuse of words. People throw around the word hatred when that was a word you didn't say, when we were growing up, and people just use it so loosely. And I would try to, maintain and hold the upper ground, but people just need to control themselves, use your intellect and your reason, and I would be representative of maintaining civility. I've noticed that too, and I think people just need to control themselves, be considerate.
Thank you. Todd Bloom.
Can you state the question again?
Absolutely. If elected, what will you do to ensure civility in discourse and factually accurate legislation and policies?
Well, I think that Mr. Binns has picked up on a point here about the civility, and it's easy to become the kind of keyboard commando. I think is the terminology that the internet uses for people who are get all worked up and spew venom that they would never speak the way they would never speak it face to face with somebody. And it's easy to get wrapped up in that, especially when you see a Twitter feud or some kind of a social media. But I think a lot of these things could be distractions to the way that we operate. And I think that as a federal legislature, we would have to be able to put that aside, be able to create and maintain harmonious and civil relations with both parties and all parties, if you will, in order to maintain relations and have effective legislation.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
In terms of bringing back civility and treating others with civility, especially in our politics, I'm really about just focusing on the policies. I don't believe in ad hominem attacks, and I believe in looking to the other side and what they may support that I would be able to as well. So, for example, if I were in Congress, what would I be able to, what would I support that would be in alignment maybe with some of the more conservative members of the chamber? One would be digital privacy. I don't believe that we should have, we have a system of mass surveillance right now. That's something that I oppose, and I could align with conservatives on that. I also align with many conservatives on getting money out of politics, greater transparency in government, and to take it another direction as well. I think civility in terms of discourse is important, and working with the other side. We also need to look at the civility of our policies themselves. It's uncivil, to put it mildly, for somebody to die 10 years younger because they're poor than somebody who's rich. It's uncivil for there to be 600,000 homeless people. So we really need to look at economic civility and well-being in this country, as well as the civility discourse.
Thank you. Now it's time for closing statements. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions. There were an enormous number that were submitted. Each candidate has up to 1 minute for their closing statement. We'll change the order of the opening statements. And so we're going to start with Todd Bloom, then Rebecca Parson, and then Chris Binns. So Todd Bloom, your 1 minute closing statement, please. Todd Bloom, your 1 minute closing statement, please.
Great, thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to address the voters of the 6th District of Washington. I was late to join this race. I had run before in 2016, and because the economy is so shaky and inflation is raging, I definitely think we need somebody with the kind of credentials and the kind of experience that I bring. I ran in 2016 as a Republican. I had the endorsement of the Pierce County Republican Party and the Republican establishment statewide. I've served as treasurer of the Republican Party. So I'm no stranger to the voters, or should be no stranger to the voters of this district. Although it's been some time, I do believe that I present the best combination of skills, experience, credentials, and background to be the most effective in this position and to work with the coming Republican majority in Congress. I think that it would be remiss to think that there will be a Democrat majority, and I think that we can be most effective and have the most effective representation by voting Republican in this election.
Thank you. Rebecca Parson.
Thank you. Well, I didn't mention it earlier, so I wanted to bring up a little bit more about my background. I'm a small business owner, a commissioner on the Tacoma Commission on Disabilities, board member, have served as a board member of Whole Washington, and had a lot of different volunteer appointments. And that's what originally got me interested in running for Congress. Is I believe in politics as a public service, which is not the way it's run right now. And as part of that public service, I think we need people in office who do not take corporate money and who are actually running and protecting the rights of the people they serve and not their donors and corporations. So to that end, I support protecting Medicare, never ever privatizing it, protecting Social Security and expanding Social Security, doing something real about inflation, getting inflation relief checks out to people, making sure people can get better jobs at a decent and good living wage. I believe we need Medicare for all. So that everybody can get health care when they need it. And we also need a national housing program to address this housing crisis. It's affecting people in so many ways, especially here in the district. So I support a robust economic program to make anybody watching this, to make your life better economically. That's the bottom line for me, and I hope to win your vote.
Thank you. Chris Binns.
You want policies based on the truth. One's hammered out with reason, discernment, deference to the Constitution, and wisdom to perceive unintended consequences. We need judicial reform so when it comes to exercising rights, the matter doesn't take years to resolve, like in the case of Coach Joe Kennedy in Bremerton. Honest, direct, and accountable leadership that builds trust, which is essential for the people as we all work together in what are going to be difficult times for at least the near future. As your representative, you'll be provided the best leadership and protection that any other candidate in the race can offer. Thank you.
Thank you all. In ballot order, the candidates for Congressional District 6 are Rebecca Parson, Tom Triggs, Derek Kilmer, Chris Binns, Todd Bloom, and Elizabeth Kreiselmeyer. You all should have received your ballots. Be sure to vote early and no later than August 2nd. I'd like to thank the candidates who participated. I really want to thank the timekeeper, Terry Baker, for doing such an awesome job. The Tacoma Pierce County League of Women Voters, the Leagues of Women Voters of Kitsap and Jefferson County, and our community sponsors, the Affordable Housing Consortium, Asia Pacific Cultural Center, Grit City Co-op, Latinx Unidos of South Sound, the NAACP of Tacoma, the Sumner Waller Community Association, the Tacoma Urban League, Vibrant Schools, and the YWCA of Pierce County. You can see other League of Women Voter candidate forums at lwvtpc.org. Read your voters pamphlet, look at vote411.org, where you can find answers to questions posed to all candidates running for office, and read the candidates' websites. Do everything that you can to be an educated voter, and please don't forget to vote before August 2nd. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody. You did a great job. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for all the work you put in.
Recording stopped.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right. So that is that. I hope you found that useful and helpful. I didn't quite get down the League of Women Voters, TPC. I'll put down what I captured there. and put that into the chat. As it is scrolling across the bottom, gather together, grow together, and the Conduit Network do not endorse any candidates. I definitely will reserve the right to make comments on the candidates, but we do not endorse any candidates. So just wanted to make that known, as we have had several folks coming on for commissioner more than once. During last year's election, we had folks coming on, and we'll continue to have people on going forward. So you just need to be aware of that. Okay. So my critique, or whether I agree or disagree with a particular candidate, does not at all, you know, should not indicate who I'm going to vote for if I vote for anyone, because I think a no vote is also a vote. So I do not agree with, we got to vote for somebody, and, black people died for the right to vote. Don't agree with that. I think that's hyperbole.
Stop the cap.
Cap. Okay. So anyway, that was very interesting. Some things to note, and I am really horrible with names. So maybe you can tell me the gentleman who was who spoke last. What was his name? Rob, I know you're listening. Was Tom the accountant? I'll call him Tom. Rebecca, and what was the third person's name there? What was the third person's name? I want to get the names right on that. So I do apologize. Like I said, I'm horrible with names. However, if I can describe them, which is often fraught with danger, because if you describe somebody wrong, you will trigger someone, of course. I will call him the older gentleman. Elections and voting. Let me see if he'll come up there. But the elder gentleman, the one who was not the accountant, what I felt like he was a far right candidate, and I felt like Rebecca is a far left candidate, and I believe that is Tom. Seems to be, right of center, pretty far to the right, but not at the polar extremes as Rebecca and the older gentleman. So that's kind of my perception of what I saw there. And so, one other thing I thought was interesting was listening to the sponsors. So the NAACP and the Urban League. I did not hear any questions on, specifically African Americans. Obviously economy and education and all those things are for everyone, of course. But I didn't hear anything there. And granted, there are a lot of questions that were submitted, as said before. Like I said, it just might be a coincidence that none of those things happen to pop up. But that is something that I recognize. One other thing that I would say is, just because of time, it's really tough, right? There were 7, 8, 9 questions. And so 60 seconds to 90 seconds is not a lot of time to really give an in-depth answer. Although some people, didn't use up their whole time, which is great. But on some things, I actually wanted to hear a little bit more. So I don't think there's necessarily a perfect format. It was exactly an hour and a half. So they really did a good job of staying on time there. I will definitely watch this back and see if we can't implement the strategy of the League of Women Voters, because they were on it, so I can definitely appreciate that. But I want people to feel like they can give a full answer without just kind of trailing off into a word salad. So you want to keep it succinct, but you also want a complete thought. So I think that's important. I don't remember if they mentioned if they got the information, the questions beforehand, or if they were getting them cold, right? Uh, Rebecca did appear to be more knowledgeable on many of the issues, was able to cite many sources, right? I believe the accountant, if his name was Tom, was also able to do that. The elder gentleman didn't seem to be able to do that quite as well. That was the gentleman that seemed more far right, didn't seem to articulate, data and facts, from anywhere. A lot of it was opinion, which, a lot of this is, right? That's why they're running. So anyway, very fascinating. I was just telling Jeff Campbell earlier, I've been having a lot of fun since meeting him and getting involved in this more. So I'm having a blast. They're long days for sure, and there's so many candidates and so many issues, and what do you do? I would say, uh, I don't know. You're going to look at how they answer the questions for each issue. Some issues are going to have more weight than others. You may be looking at the person who is most aligned with how you think. Let's say there's 10 issues and this person is 7 out of 10. So that's who you're going to go with. Or you might say, hey, I've got 2 really big issues. And if they're on those 2 issues, then that's who I'm voting for. I don't care about what they do with the rest. So, uh, people are going to come to their conclusions in a lot of different ways. But it is important to hear what they're saying because it really does telegraph, what they're going to do or what they're not going to do. And sometimes there's overlap. Are they down the line voters, right? Like I said, the far left candidate, what I would say is Rebecca. She pretty much was straight down the line from a kind of a social justice candidate on the left. And the gentleman on the far right was straight down the line of, kind of a hardcore, kind of nationalist. I don't call him a nationalist because that seems like a bad word. It's not. I'm a nationalist. Um, a bad word, but, a conservative on the right, and kind of straight down the line, right? So, what do you do there if you're not totally aligned with both sides? I actually like some things from both sides of the extreme, you know, and so it's very hard to find a candidate that can kind of meld those two things together and kind of think and value the things that I value at the level that I value them. And I think there are a lot of us that are like that here, and our voices aren't being heard. And I don't think necessarily that third candidate is that person either. Um, Nor will I say, do I think Kilmer is? And I don't know who the fifth person is. So, you know, it's always a hard decision to vote. It's always a hard decision to vote. But I hope that you won't just vote, go along to get along. I hope that you will look at the candidates, look at their platform, look at what they believe in, look if they walk the talk. One thing I did like about Rebecca is that, she was out there, right? She did serve on this and she did serve on that. So I do appreciate that, right? Um, so I think that is important. And I, to that end, I think it's important to a point, right? I think it becomes less helpful if you are kind of a career board and committee member, right? We know those people that are on 10, 12 boards, and that's how they pretty much spend their time, right? I don't think that's helpful either. But you know, definitely submit any questions that you want us to ask the candidates. We've had someone reach out to Rebecca, and she has agreed to come on to the conduit. As I said, we'll be reaching out to the other candidates and asking them to appear. I don't think that we will have them on together. I think logistically that is difficult, and August 2nd is fast approaching, right? But what we will do is ask them the exact same question. So that's why I like that format. Maybe we'll give them more time because they're on one at a time. So we'll ask them questions and give them maybe 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes to answer that question, or 3 minutes like they do for city council. It really is an eternity. 3 minutes talking is takes a lot longer than you think. Once you get going, it's like, man, what else do I say? Now, me, I don't have that problem, as I just did a 3.5-hour podcast earlier cold. So, I don't have that issue. I just need to shut up. But, just saying. All right. Well, it is 8:36. I love you guys. I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that you have found this to be useful and helpful. Govern yourselves accordingly. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And we will see you tomorrow. Oh, and as I get updates on the ARPA funds and on the community block grant, I will continue to share that information with you. Okay? So again, if you're not ready for this year, you can be ready for next year or the year after that. All right, folks. Power is taken, it is not given. I am R1 Cameron. This is The Conduit. We'll see you next time.